not every one of the co-authors are here, but let's see, Kyoko is here. So maybe we can start with you, and thank you very much on the Belgian Ethical Bank newbie. And it's wonderful to be able to talk about what works and what doesn't work, because that's how we learn the best. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I just thought that I'm in the wrong session, but it seems it's okay. May I just share the screen? Do you see the screen?
There you go. Yes.
Okay. So Dirk Kokkeberg and myself presenting this piece of study, how the Belgian Ethical Bank newbie failed to cultivate steward investors. So the title reveals already that what we want to do, but I wanted to take you through who is newbie and what happened and what we want to do. So who is newbie? Newbie is a civil movement in Belgium, started 2011 in the aftermath of the financial crisis, 2008. And it was initiated by 24 founder NGOs, and its plan is to create an ethical bank to sever any unethical behaviors which has been observed in the financial crisis. And as of end of October, there are 124,000 retail cooperators, 350 NGOs, and 11 institutional investors. There are two key events during 2011 and today. Event one, January 2020, newbie got the banking license after securing required capital. So from civil movement to a bank. And event two, 30th September 2020, National Bank of Belgium was communicating already before that the newbie needed to secure additional 40 million capital in order to maintain the banking license. They failed to secure this capital. So it leads to today. What happened? Newbie is collapsing. So the Belgian news sources and also English language Brussels Times is writing about the newbie collapsing. Newbie didn't manage to secure required capital to maintain as a bank. So lots of media coverage has been there, and the particular interest was the role of investors because capital need to be recruited by the investors. So I wanted to take you through very briefly newbie ownership. Three broad categories of investors are feeding into with a single vote. Irrespective of any shareholder category, you have one vote because it is a cooperative structure, and they're feeding into a general assembly to vote on key issues. So what are the three broad categories? Class A, Class B, Class C. Class A investors or share owners, they are the civil society organization, including the founding 24 civil society organization, paying a minimum 2,000. Class A has to be civil society organization. I skip B and come back to B. Class C, these are the institutional investors paying a minimum 200,000 euro. So it's a certain sum. But if civil society is ready to pay more than 200,000, they can be categorized under Class C. Class B, individual cooperators, I just said 124,000 as of today, paying a minimum 20 euro. Or civil society organization, if they cannot pay more than 2,000, but pay less. Or small and medium-sized companies, if they're paying less than 200,000. So these are a broad categorization of class A, B, C. And certainly class B category shareholders are the large majority, nearly 3/4 of new B ownership structure. So with this in mind, I just take you to the focus of institutional investors, which is class C. There are 11 institutional investors, 6 private investors, 2 government investors, and 3 government subsidized investors. If we follow the principle of follow the money, we decided to categorize into these 3. So 6 private investors, the 3 are the financial institutions, and 1 SME, and 2 private foundations, 2 governments. These are the regional agencies of Brussels government and Wallon government. And in the middle, 3 government subsidized organizations, civil society organization Financité, and 2 universities, UC Louvain / University Louise in one group, and ULB. Maybe you could guess that it seems like a lot of francophone present in this very typical Belgian scene, but indeed the majority of the participants in this New B movement come from Wallon, French-speaking. And here I just want to focus on the financial institutions. In fact, these are all Monceau Group, 3 Monceau Group companies, the French insurer groups. And this group is a single large investor of New B, and they also take a role of insurance sales partner. So disproportionately, these financial institutions are very important for New B structure. So with this sort of overviews, and we wanted to understand, so what are the roles or the place of investors in the stakeholder capitalisms? Of course, I didn't do a massive overview of a whole literature review, but investors' role, or investors' place is quite uncomfortable in the whole stakeholder capitalism theory. Shareholders are short-termism, long-term interest alignment is very important for the corporate managers to keep on aligning the interest with investors to build trust. Another one is institutional investors can institute an orientation to stakeholder capitalisms. The previous session, I heard a lot of these ideas about how investors could really help reinforce the stakeholder capitalisms. But there's also another idea, Desjardins and Xi, investors attracted to an idea of stakeholder return, not necessarily to a long-term business plan, easily become discontent and tend to withdraw, so lose interest, maybe in short term. So these are kind of very, sorry to say, quick and dirty literature reviews. But we was, Dirk and I are so interested in the motivations and the interest, political interest, interest of investors, why they, in the first place, engage themselves in the New B movement, and why they decided to bring capital, and why they decided not to raise capital when there is a crisis, the license to operate crisis for the New B. So the motivations issues we couldn't really find in the stakeholder capitalism theory. We thought the best way forward could be, first, research questions. How did different types of investors make sense of their interest in the moving external environment. Because external environment are changing from the financial crisis to today, there is a systemic financial stability problems, and the capital requirement has been strengthened. National regulators also strengthening its supervision. So these are the changing environment externally to the new B Bank.
Kyoko, that's great. We're into the 5 minutes for the Q&A. So
okay,
if you want to,
excuse me. Yeah, okay. I just go ahead. So these are the research questions, and we want to focus on the investors and the why investors didn't fund more. So research design, participant observations, and the longitudinal case study, and also secondary database. These are the roughly sketch of what we do. And we wanted to do the data collection, as I just said, is 3 methods, and the data analysis through a quantitative theory approach, and the 3 stages of coding. And I hope to be able to bring up a storyline and the key conceptual variables in order to corroborate with the stakeholder capitalism theory. So this is a research plan, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, no, this is great because, and we're going to pick up in a moment with John when we talk about the development of stakeholder theory. But this makes it real right in front of you. And the question that really stands out for me is the short-term, long-term, right? Because we talk about this a lot. I'm on a board of a bank. It's all short-term, and come to ABIS and other things, it's much more about the long-term. But you distinguish between the value, stakeholder value, and long-term orientation, right? Do you want to, anything in particular that you're finding about that, or that you want to say about that?
We don't want to preempt any emerging results through the coding process, but certainly the different categories of investors are already telling us some preliminary conceptual key variables from institutional investors, government type of investors, or government subsidized type of investors, and they are placed in a very different political situations. So I think that their motivations are very much influenced by the political situation they were placed, and our role is to find out what kind of pressures were going on when they decided on the capital increase, capital participations or investment.
Yeah, really interesting. You can see loud and clear that there is something about context, not just the big picture context, but the local context, the Belgian context, and as that changes, this plays out. Does anybody want to jump in with a question for Kim? Just go ahead and unmute if you want to.
Yeah. So Maury, can you hear me?
Hi, Dwayne, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Dwayne Windsor. So I have a quick question, Kyoko.
Yes,
so
yes.
Suppose what's going on, this is just suppose, because I don't know the case. Suppose what you find is that the initial investors were willing to put in money out of socio-political motivations, but they then discovered that the business model doesn't work under the changing conditions, and therefore I won't put more money into a bad project. Now, I don't know whether you can discover that by interviews, but it's at least a hypothesis to consider.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Yeah, we are getting there. And obviously, Dirk and I were both participants in the New B functional structures. So the other author, Dirk Kokoberg, and he was even the former CEO of the New B, and obviously we are not dealing with the confidential information or anything like that, but I mean we can bring in a lot of animated observations, insights, including how to reach the interviewer and also how to interpret interviewers' nuance and things like that. And so we want to really bring in this kind of very active research model. But thank you very much, Mr. Windsor. It's very interesting point, and perhaps this is one of the perhaps key findings. Yeah,
This is great. This is great because I'm always talking about how can we get, show a picture, give an example of what it looks like. This is going to be quite the example. So I'm looking forward to the next steps there. Thank you very much, Kyoko.
Thank you very much.
And let me turn to John, who this is great that he's with us now, particularly given what I hear tomorrow from Ed Freeman. So John McArdle from Salem State, welcome.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me and thanks for coming. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, I think you can all see it now. And what I'm going to talk about is a piece that came out of teaching that I do with my colleague and dear friend, Alice DeKoning at the University of Calgary. We were at Salem State together for a long time, and then she and her husband got the unicorn positions of finding a place where they could both work and get paid for it in the same building and live in the same city for once, instead of the first 20 years of their careers. And we've continued to do the work cross-collaboratively in North America across our borders for the last 6 years as a result. And what this topic is about is flipping the script on the normal way that we talk about stakeholder theory from a top-down model where the firm is at the top or the center of the conversation and the stakeholders are relationally placed alongside the firm. So I'll take you through the slide here and show you the typical view of viewing stakeholder relationships that most of us teach when we teach this, and where we have our students often coming in thinking about stakeholder relationships as either A, something that has to be dealt with when you think about a stakeholder or managed, or B, a series of dyadic relationships that one has with the various stakeholders. We break stakeholders out in very different ways, but for the most part, people use 6 or 7 different categories of stakeholders, right? Your investors, your customers, employees, suppliers, the community. Some people include the environment, others don't. Some people, like me, break government out from the community. When I learned the notion of stakeholder capitalism and stakeholder relations for the first time, it was when I was in law school. And my law school professors pretty much told me, and the dominant view in the early 2000s was, it's a cute idea, but really you have fiduciary duties to your shareholders, and that's all you should care about. I teach accounting now, and my students often come in with that mindset, and I taught entrepreneurship for a long time, and they came in with that mindset as well. And what we found was that we found that to be limiting from 2 perspectives. It was limiting from a teaching perspective because we thought that it didn't allow us to provide a holistic view of what the role of business in society is. And to Lisa's point from the opening discussion, bringing the humanities in is a great way to have that discussion. Another way to do it is thinking about rooting the conversation in something that we all share and have a context that is similar with, and that's community. So we thought, what would happen if we shifted the view to the community rather than the typical dominant view of firm as the dominant actor in stakeholder relations? How that typical view is formulated is the firm's the primary entity in the ecosystem being all of the stakeholders that are involved there. The other actors in the ecosystem are stakeholders of the firm. And that's typically how the default position gets developed in a classroom setting between the conversation with the students and the faculty member as that unfolds organically. All interactions in that frame get somewhat limited to a give-get transaction relationship between the firm and stakeholders, and they look very dyadic in nature. So I've done a visual presentation because I decided to have fun with it rather than give you a lot of stats. But if you think about a dyadic map, this is a typical social network theory type of illustration where you see that they're dyadic pairs and that the lines intersect between the pairs. You may have clusters and nodes where there's a lot of stuff going on, but like contracts, you boil them down to the 2 parties in the transaction and what the nature of the relationship is between the 2 parties. And often you do that employing the fiction of this happens in a vacuum, when we all know that it really doesn't, because life is messy and complicated and people occupy lots of different spaces. And the reality of the case is that the firm's dependent on the ecosystem to survive. It's not the other way around, even if we want to think about it that way, particularly if we're owners or founders. And the ecosystem can probably survive without firms, because it does. Is firms end all of the time, and the ecosystem plugs on and gaps get filled and things get changed, and we have sometimes dry periods that then become more organically, less over time when some new firm steps in to take that role. But that's not often how we teach it. That's not often how we frame it and think about it in our research. And I think our default perspective is flawed as a result of that. Much like this perspective, which is an illustration of the Ptolemaic geocentric system of the universe, where the Earth is at the center and everything revolved around it. Or as I like to explain to my 3 children, particularly my oldest child, when he was younger, the way that he looked at the world in our house, which was not reality. Our teaching stakeholder relations with a firm-centric approach often produces students who then go out into the world in the business that they start or they work for or they advise that employ the same type of view. And I think it's to our detriment as a society and perhaps in our classrooms as well. So I thought, and Alice thought, what if we shifted the focus and we started talking about the community as the center? And we developed a pedagogy and an OER related to it, Street Challenge, which is available in open access, that provides a series of lesson plans that take students into communities and have them do, because she teaches entrepreneurship, opportunity recognition, opportunity development, thinking about walking the street for 3 blocks and then looking for patterns within the businesses and the landscape there and places where value might be added, either from a business perspective or ideally from a social perspective. And the students that we're seeing now are coming in with a very social justice view in both of our institutions and want to do that kind of thing. So we're finding it valuable from that perspective. We've done a lot of engagement with the students and reflections and interviews. And what we found from that is that the perception has changed amongst the students who we've had go through that pedagogical process, because where before they'd come through thinking about stakeholder relationships and stakeholder management as being managing those relationships, they now think about intersecting the firm within the community. So you'll see that it's a very subtle shift. All I did when I made these charts was flip the firm and the community space in Excel and then print them out this way. And the community is now the dominant player and the firm is one of the stakeholders of the community. But the result of that amongst students was to change their view. Flipping the script places the firm not in the primary ordinal position, but in a subordinate one to the community, recognizing that the community is going to continue to exist regardless of whether the firm is there. And when you put the firm in as a stakeholder of the community in the way that you model it, both in teaching and in our research as we've developed it now, we see the community being the benefactor and the other stakeholders, actors within and depend on the community ecosystem. When we speak with business owners who are located in local communities, we often find when we do interviews with them, because we do a lot of qualitative research with family businesses and business owners, that they exist where they exist, not because it's convenient for them, but because they want to add value in the community they live in, or that their business has history and it's important to them not only to own the business, but also to be a prime mover and an influencer within that community. And in fact, when we talk to stakeholders, we see that they don't fit into the neat little boxes where they're employees or their investors. It's a mosaic approach rather than a dyadic approach where they occupy multiple nodes. And I like this particular graphic because you can see the colors get picked up in different designs. So if a red person or a red is an employee, for example, well, they're also showing up perhaps in the node that might look like community member because perhaps they live there, or as a customer because perhaps they shop and do business with the business that they work at. I don't think that we consider the intersectionality of stakeholder identification quite as well as we should when we go through thinking about teaching and researching and conceptualizing these concepts. And really, when you put it into the model of the community being at the center, you move from a geocentric to a heliocentric view. And this is Calarius's 17th century chart illustrating Copernicus's heliocentric model of the universe. It was kind of fun. And doing this, I think, opens the students' minds and allows them to access thinking about the relationship of business and society in a local way, in a way that's very different than what they typically experience in their classrooms. And in our research setting, what we found is framing the questions and thinking about stakeholder relationships from a community-centric perspective has changed the nature of the way that we go about conceptualizing the research studies that we want to do as well, which I found fascinating over the last few years. The shift in perspective has created a shift in the qualitative assessment of relationships and interactions, and I think in very positive ways for us, and certainly within the conversations with students, but also with business owners as well, who we involve in the class, like many of us do, in multiple ways. So we've got 3 pieces of research coming out from this, and I'm mindful of time. I've got about 30 seconds left. The first is a conceptual paper building on these themes, and that's going to be ready ideally at the end of December, but probably January. A SOTL paper, a scholarship teaching and learning paper, describing how to introduce the theory in a classroom with a lesson plan and modules and materials in case anyone wants to do it. And then an empirical paper that we've just come up with the idea of, which is building on work that lots of people do, but from the perspective of thinking about community and coding for language around community orientation, and a random selection of publicly traded US and Canadian firms triangulated against performance to see whether or not that community focus as a factor of what typically gets seen as ESG factors in that type of research actually is something we can tease out, and we'll be doing that in second quarter 2023. And that's us. If you'd like to contact us, a little over 10 minutes, but I think we're in Q&A.
Very nice, John. That's great stuff. And I have to say, I'm minded to think how different cultures from parts of the world may be perhaps in the space that you were describing. I don't know, some of the Asian and probably some of the African societies will have that, but it's a fascinating, opening up, if you will, because we're not just kind of flipping, we're also zooming out to see how that big picture comes together. Questions for John, and thank you for keeping the time.
I'm usually not good at that, so I'm having a good day.
Great stuff. Questions, comments, just feel free to jump in.
Yes, there is a first question by Duncan Levinson to John in the chat. I can read. Makes sense from a social license to operate perspective, but I suspect that there may be a more illustrative way of graphically depicting the change, the firm as part of a system. So this is the question.
I think it's a great question. One of the problems that I had is that I was technologically inept at going beyond making pie charts that I did, but you're absolutely right. And I think that framing it as part of a system is important, and links back to Maury's point about different cultures framing the relationship between business and community differently than we do in a Western and particularly North American context. I just came back from Fulbright in Kosovo, where I was in Mitrovica for a month, and I'll be back for 2 months in the spring. And as an emerging economy that's in a country that's about 15 years old, it's fascinating to see how the business relationships in a small city are so reliant on relationships, and it's palpable. And I've seen that in small island studies as well, and certainly in some Asian culture studies that I've looked at. So yeah, I think that the systems view is probably a better way to depict it. I just couldn't figure out how to do that for this.
Oh, really good. One more question, maybe? But if not, we can move ahead, because what's happening here, you can see all these things relate, as they do also to the bigger conference themes. I want to thank you, John, and hope you'll be able to join us with Ed Freeman tomorrow as well. So let's move to Dwayne Windsor from Rice about integrating the 3 theories of capitalism. How you doing?
Sorry, is my screen up where you can see
You're
it?
there. Yep, all good.
All right, thank you. So I'll try and move through this efficiently. The idea is to go back to John's presentation. I'm thinking to myself, this spring I'm teaching MBA and undergraduate students, and how am I going to explain what we're talking about to them, and carry out a discussion. And then my idea is that what the conversations are about is we're really dealing with 3 theories of 21st century capitalism. And the problem is not to pick one of them. The problem is to figure out how to integrate them. And I'll explain why that's, to me, going to turn out to be the case. So the 21st century is going to be unpleasant. I won't go through the details of that. Everybody knows it already. And the basic elements for discussion with, say, students and then academic research is shareholders, stakeholders, and democracy. And so the way I positioned this analysis for presentation is to think about three different theories, which in a sense form a logical continuum. So the conventional theory, which I've called anti-commons capitalism, focused on shareholder wealth maximization. I'm drawing on a body of literature that deals with coordination failures in market economies. I'll characterize as a set of contracts among egoists, although it can be characterized as mutual advantage cooperation that leads on to social welfare. That's the basic argument in favor of it. And we actually have a couple of 100 years of experience with capitalism. So a competing theory, stakeholder capitalism, is some form of cooperation leading to stakeholder value maximization for multiple parties, but it has not yet escaped the problem of both egoists and altruists. So theory 3 is also under discussion in the literature. Let's throw away both of these and go to something that is more oriented to the commons, which is basically control of the government by competing kinds of parties. And I give some examples, but ultimately this goes up the road to radical transformation in terms of ecology and the way the economy is organized. So then the second slide doesn't necessarily require a lot of time and attention. It's basically working up the details of what we know is good and bad about anti-commons capitalism. So it's about self-interest. It operates through contracts, and we know from experience that it's got all kinds of problems, and that these problems may not be solved by responsiveness and responsibility and various other instruments that have been proposed. So substitute stakeholder capitalism. But before I get there on the next slide, then there are also typically going to be problems with the solutions at the system level, where in effect we're designing new social contracts. And so there may be some difficulties that are attached there. Okay, so then I want to talk on this slide about stakeholder capitalism as a cooperation model involving both egoists and altruists. That is, there both types of people are going to be found there. I had suggested in my question for the first speaker about New B that the problem could be that you've got egoists who aren't willing to put in more money, although they started off that way. I don't know. That's a case study. So to derive business principles means that first, there have to be some kind of value incentives for egoists. So part of the conversation will always be, you can solve this problem by replacing them. So educationally, we bring in new people, so they don't worry about this problem anymore. I have to explain that to my students because they're in business school mostly because they are looking for better life and more wealth. In the stakeholder capitalism theory, the way it has been positioned, I think, most recently is that managers can avoid trade-offs among stakeholders, and they can obviate the need for CSR because the managers and the members of the cooperative enterprise do innovations that provide benefits to all the stakeholders. So if that works, fine, but I would submit we don't have really good testing. That is, these are a set of promises, not a series of experiences. And then theory 3 is actually at work around us in various ways in both the actual polities and in the literature. And so the question that I'm beginning to explore is what prevents majoritarian democracy from sliding into something else except maybe political capitalism? All right, so so now another part of the paper, I won't go into much detail, is that the continuum that I'm suggesting exists also involves variance. So the extreme variant of anti-commons is amoral self-interest. I just don't care what happens to you. I maximize, and I don't worry about social impacts, externalities, whatever. And then the other variant, moving more toward humanistic management in a sense, is something like enlightened satisficing, which we can call responsibility. And we can also influence amoral self-interested actors by, in effect, forcing them to be more responsive. But all of this requires some sort of sacrifice on their part. And what I put again to the group is what the New B case may reveal is there are limits to self-sacrifice. How far can you make this work without replacing these people? And then in stakeholder capitalism, I suggest that there are also two variants. One variant, which I'll associate with Ed Freeman, is enlightened team or joint production. They cooperate, but the solutions are by innovation that makes mutual benefits feasible. I don't know that we have very good tests of that, actually, historically. The other, which I think actually also came up in the New B case study, is what I'll call weighted governance. And I point to some sources, which means how they designed the voting rights is part of the governance structure. And there was a choice between how many votes do you get. J.M. Schmucker has a system in which the longer you stick with them, the more votes you get. That's a weighted governance system. So if the manager can't solve the trade-offs by innovation, how did the members of the enterprise vote? That's a weighted voting governance problem, which, how do you enforce it? And then when we get to theory 3, which is designing commons capitalism, again, there's a couple of variants, one of which requires, in the nature of altruism, moral self-sacrifice. That is, when do I shift from hydrocarbon vehicles to electric vehicles? And what are my motivations and incentives? Or up the road, in more extreme version, maybe enlightened dictatorship, where the dictator calculates what the population will accept. If you want to study that, you can watch Xi Jinping dealing with, I don't want to be locked down anymore. That's a question in enlightened dictatorship as a calculus. So now this then gets us to the problem of the political role of business. And here I'll draw on two opposed views that will highlight what I think the issues are. One is the Sharon Palazzo theory of political corporate social responsibility, where in effect, businesses of whatever kind are substituting for the government and have a moral responsibility to promote democracy, both inside the business and in the broader society. And I contrast this with a recent paper by Hussein and Moriarty in the Journal of Business Ethics. The quote is down below, which says, no, businesses has to be subordinated to the broader society. Those are the two polar positions. And here I'll point back to John's presentation, where in effect the business is subordinated to the community. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but those are the opposing views. So I don't think, well, I'll show the last slide. I won't go through it in detail. I then tied this to some previous work of my own, which is about social responsibility and irresponsibility, in which the notion of business ethics, in my view, breaks into three different problems. It's not simple, it's complicated. One problem is not to do harm or to pay compensation if you did. This is roughly akin to not doing net negative harm to the environment. That's what it translates to. Mandatory compliance, which is set by the state in the hands of some form of majoritarian democracy, desirably, is about setting laws and public policies, which characterizes the Hussein and Moriarty argument. Good citizenship, which I draw on a definition of what it means from Adam Smith, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, is that the motivation to do good, as opposed to not doing bad and complying with the law, is a moral sentiment that I want to help my neighbors and the rest of the world. Is there a question of how you build that motivation? That leads on to the Sharon Palazzo notion of political corporate social responsibility. So I'll end with the reason I color-coded this is so each one of these arguments is systematically followed throughout. So green is theory 1, red is theory 3, and blue is theory 2. So I'll stop there and let's see what questions we have.
Yeah, that's great, Dwayne. Boy, it's a lot to think about.
But, well, it's fast, yes.
But no, but it's really interesting because where you're laying out, opposites or complementary themes, I can still see space in between, right? Just like just like the two kinds of people thing with my favorite quote. I'm sorry.
Well, and I would say my basic argument is we've only begun to start to fill in the space of what we're talking about for the coming century.
Yeah.
Right? That would be my basic argument. So
yeah,
I think that's worth exploring.
The coming one that is already 23 years here, that one?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Very good.
It was looking better previously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. I did a piece called Looking Back on Looking Forward to 2020, which is what all the companies did. John, did you want to, I see the comment there, did you want to put that to Dwayne directly?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was immediately thinking about blockchain and DeFi networks because our students are excited about it, and yours probably are too. And the idea that governance tokens really dictate who has power and control in a market that has absolutely no regulation whatsoever. And based on today's Financial Times, all of the accounting firms are now scrambling to figure out how do we audit assets that we don't even know how to book.
Right. And how do we figure out that what happened at FTX before it gets worse and spreads throughout the financial system? Yeah. So do you have a question or you want me to respond to the comment?
Well, my thought was that you just have a natural field experiment with looking at all the different structural ways that these various exchanges.
Well, and the way I would think about the natural field experiment is that what you're looking at is a field experiment in anti-commons capitalism, right? It may camouflage itself as it's good for everyone. That's a detailed question. And then the issue will arise of when should regulation be imposed and how is it going to be designed? Mm-hmm. So the problem in any regulation, I'll draw on some work by economists, is that when is the regulation worse than the problem? So, and how do we know that? So there's a benefit cost analysis of these two questions. So no, but I agree with you. That's a very good thought that we may be looking at kind of a natural experiment.
Well, and one of the other very interesting things being here in Europe, looking at what portion of the world are you talking about, right? For any given system, what about complementarity or incompatibility of systems, and what about what's the wider universe context? And let me see if there is another question for Dwayne. If not, I'm going to go to our colleagues from actually from Europe. Anybody else there? No, this is so you've got the substance here is not debatable. The question is, how do we map this for the context in which we sit? So there's the 21st century context. There's the North American context, there's the European context, there's the Asian and the global context. And what I'm really scratching my head about is how do we address the wider group connections once we settle, if we ever do, what a particular society responsibilities and model is supposed to be, just to sort of raise the tough question.
Yeah, no, I think you make a very good point that part of the wider issue that I don't delve into is, suppose everything we understand conceptually and do in practice simply fragments into country-specific and region-specific variations. Yeah. That may go back to the notion of coordination issues, where the basic definition of coordination failure is there are too many people with voting rights and they all block each other. So you have what amounts to gridlock institutionally and intellectually. So yeah, no, I think that's right. That's up a level for me.
If not within a particular system, then across levels in a set of systems.
That's right.
And we see that a lot in different places. Very good. Well, this is great stuff. Let me move on now to Fran and Eloy, because the capitalist side of the equation and assessing stakeholder capitalism as a suitable, love that word, a suitable business paradigm. And gentlemen, you're both here, I think. So let me just turn it over to you. Okay. Here we go. So we've got the slide. Okay, is it going to be Ferran speaking or Eloy?
Yeah. Sorry. I'm trying to fix my presentation. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, we had you there for a second. Excellent.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the paper I am going to be presenting today belongs to this research I'm carrying out hand in hand with Eloy, who is here with me today and who will also participate in the Q&A. This is an ongoing research, so we will be very grateful to receive your comments when we finish. You can see here the current title of our paper, and the title speaks for itself. Our goal is to analyze whether there might be features inherent to the capitalist system that may potentially act against the stated goals of a stakeholder capitalism. Our hypothesis here is that only moving the recipient of the value generated by the capitalist system from the shareholders to the stakeholders is not a sufficient move to overcome the ongoing rapid degradation of the social and ecological systems. So we choose 3 units of analysis to conduct our research. The first one is the business sustainability practice, which is the realm of business strategy and operations. The second one is the capitalist system itself. And the third one is the social and ecological system, which is currently going through an extreme climate and environmental emergency that we all know and that currently is threatening humanity. We understand these 3 units as real functioning systems that are embedded within each other. And then we pose the following 2 questions. The first one is, what is the relationship that capitalism establishes with the social and ecological system as a system integrated by humans and nature? And the second one is, how does capitalism's own rationale condition the practice of corporate sustainability? Answering these 2 questions will in turn us allow to assess whether stakeholder capitalism as a paradigm currently captures these elements. We think that if it doesn't, then we have room for improvement. To answer these questions, we draw on different scientific approaches and levels of analysis. We analyze the social and ecological system from a systems thinking perspective. We approach the constituent elements of capitalism from the perspective of shareholder and stakeholder capitalism and their critics. And we deal with business sustainability practice from the corporate sustainability scientific discipline. From this analysis, we come up with 2 features of capitalism that the stakeholder capitalist paradigm fails to recognize: metabolism and totality. And before describing them, I want to note that the focus of the research inquiry here shifts from the recipient of value, as in the debate between shareholder and stakeholder capitalism, to the very nature of the value generation process in capitalism and its final implications to the social and ecological systems. Capitalist metabolism refers to the process through which capitalism organizes the relationship between humans and nature. A key element is that in capitalism, the metabolic mediation occurs by turning human labor and nature into commodities. Another key element is that nature is perceived only as a bearer of economic value. However, the pace of natural regeneration is completely independent from the logics of capital. Therefore, an incompatibility emerges between the need of the continuous reproduction of capital to generate economic value and nature's regeneration cycles. In sum, capitalist metabolism is one in which the rate and volume of resource extraction exhaust the possibilities of regeneration of the social and ecological systems. The other concept we're trying to work with is the capitalism as a totality. Capitalism establishes a set of patterns that operate at the systemic level and condition the behaviors of organizations that operate within it. There are 3 fundamental patterns implicit to capitalism's own rationale. The first is it relates to the idea of the market as the main organizing principle. Thus, economic units must depend on the market for everything they need. The second relates to the focus on economic value, which results in individual units adopting the strategy of maximizing the rates of profit. And finally, there's the issue of productive isolation, as the economy as a whole constitutes a field of natural selection by means of competition in the market. We can use an example from the industry of tuna fishing. Introducing here the totality concept helps us understand the limited scope of action and impact that single organizations in the fishing industries alone can bring to the ecological system. The market, as the main organizing principle of capitalism, keeps all the companies in the fishing industry acting in an uncoordinated way and unwilling to be transparent about tuna captures. Despite recent attempts to bring about sustainability in the system from a coordinated perspective, like the controversial Marine Stewardship Council, the incentives by default of the system remain the same. Capture as much as you can before it ends. The vision is completely short-term and narrow-minded, in our view. The vision over the value chain terminates in the tuna fish. The other concept that helps us understand these dynamics is the capitalist metabolism. Here shows how the system itself acts against the regeneration of the social and ecological systems. The capitalist paradigm conceives the tuna fishing stock as a natural available resource, isolated from all the other species and from the ecosystem where it belongs. The importance of tuna as key predators on top of the ocean food chain is overlooked. Their role in the regeneration process of the marine ecosystem is not considered either. Paradoxically, the process of generating value implicit in the capitalist system acts against the interests of fishermen. By degenerating systems at a faster pace than their capacity to regenerate, capitalist metabolism reduces the number of species in the sea and therefore the long-term profits of the fishing industry. But the negative effects of tuna fishing don't end here. Recent studies show that ensuring an adequate number of large predators in the oceans is key to the development of algae and phytoplankton, the world's main carbon sinks. Hence, tuna conservation is also important to combat global warming. This example shows that if companies had a general vision of the effects of their action on the social and ecological systems, and if they acknowledged and integrated the relevant aspects of value generation beyond short-term profits, the overall social and natural well-being generated by the system would be greater. On the one hand, ecosystems would have the chance to regenerate and would lead to more tuna catches. And on the other hand, productivity would increase and the economy would be sustainable in the long term. We think that introducing the concepts of totality and metabolism helps understand how capitalism acts against these dynamics. So we can conclude with several quick insights that help better understand the inherent limitations of stakeholder capitalism, at least in our opinion. First, real tensions in sustainability are often located at the systemic level, and more specifically, in the relationship between capitalism and the social and ecological systems. Second, capitalism is much more than a narrative. The capitalist metabolism notion casts light into how the capitalist system structures our relationship with nature. Moreover, business vision and agency are limited by the capitalist radical fragmentation of the value chain. The notion of totality can help organizations to expand their vision and design sustainability strategies with systemic effects. Fourth, reflection on system leadership should be dialectical, not only from the organizational level to the systemic level, as it has mostly been so far, but also from the systemic level to the organizational level. And finally, we claim that real sustainability solutions can only be found through relational leadership, as no single actor has the capacity to see the full picture and to identify the best solutions. this would be our research, and open to questions and
Now, this is great. I love the way that you show it. It's very compelling, and of course it just keeps raising questions about action and interpretation. So questions for Ferran and Eloy. I noticed that John mentioned the lobster fishing, which is, yeah, has some similarities for sure. And ecosystems in particular. I mean, this is something that you bring in really well, which sometimes sometimes the conversation starts there and really focuses there. Sometimes the conversations, particularly on the theory side, don't get there. But it seems to me that it's a useful way of talking about, actually what happens, right? So I always love to see, how do we show, instead of just telling, what it is that we're dealing with. So I really appreciate that. Let me ask again, people, anybody feel free, want to jump in and ask a
Can I ask a question,
Yeah.
if I may?
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for all the presentations. I'm not sure if I missed it. I was following, but I might have missed it. So, for example, if you're talking about the tuna industry and in your research and your considerations on these topics, have you already been in touch with businesses themselves working in the tuna industry, and do you have their thoughts on what you're proposing in these new kind of approaches?
Yeah, we are in touch with many companies for the nature of the center we work with. So we are actually trying to build this theory from practice instead of from grounded theory. Specifically with the tuna industry, we know some stories, direct stories, but we haven't been in touch with them. They are quite closed in this field, but we thought that we have some other examples, like relevant examples we're working with, but we thought that this one was the most wide one or broad one to exemplify the elements, the conceptual elements that we're trying to depict here in this paper. But yeah, we only want to work with concepts that we can see in the practice of corporations, if that answers your question. Yeah.
So, Laurie, I have a quick question if no one else does, but I'll.
Yeah, go ahead, but let me just say, in case we get closed down and brought into our work.
Yeah, I'll try and make this quick. So I'll make
great.
myself a tuna fisherman. This is what I'll ask my students to be. I'm a tuna fisherman. It looks to me like I've got two options to weigh from you. One option is you're convincing me I'm better off financially over a longer time horizon. But that requires me to sacrifice in the short run on a promise of more wealth in the long run. The other is someone's going to compensate me. That is, I get paid for not fishing. So I mention it that way because a similar problem arises in Amazon foresting. So the demand from Brazil is, okay, you want us to stop destroying the forest, you need to send us money. So that's the question to you. What is persuasive to me as a tuna fisherman?
I think this is a real example from a National Geographic program. Okay, it's called Pristine Seas. And it's proven that all those local communities that that depend on fishing in many islands in the Pacific and many other places get benefited very quickly if they stop fishing for 5-6 months. So they can see straight away the results. It's not that, of course, if we want to regenerate whole systems like they were before human activity, that would take us hundreds of years, especially, for example, with the corals and so many other species. But to see straight solutions to the fishing industry or straight growing of little species, it's enough in stopping 4 or 5 months. That's it. So I think once they've seen one example in other parts of the world, it's very easy to convince them any other part of the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. All right, so we're on the hour, and I just want to say I have learned a lot by just listening to our participants in the Q&A. So thank you so much to Kyoko, John, Dwayne, Ferran, Eloy, and all who joined us for this first session. We get now a 15-minute break, Antonio, right? And then we're back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much to everybody. That was great.
Okay. So we will stay right connected, but we simply mute ourselves and then come back in 15 minutes, Antonio, is that right? Yeah, good. All right. So we'll see you in 15 minutes, and thanks again.
Unless Eloy Gumma wants to, present now or research. Or
No, I was with Ferran. We both, Ferran and I, did the research, so the presentation was for both of us.
Okay. Thank you then.
Thank you.
Can I just check, are we supposed to click on leave the session, or are we just supposed to wait and we get sent back ourselves?
Well, I think you can leave the session, and then I will ask my colleague to assign us again to this breakout room. Thank you.
Thank you. Just didn't want to get it wrong. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Welcome.